Ben kendim nasıl çalışabilirim daha sürdürülebilir bir gelecek için?
Paris Jolobaju-chukti ki.
Mikä on pienenevän mehiläispopulaation vaikutus
Waarom
maapallon
zouden we om
ekosysteemiin?
klimaatverandering moeten geven?
循環型社会ってどういう仕
Quel
組み
est pire? Manger du soja non durable ou manger du
Plastic straws
viande
هو
local?
باك فاضيتا نكريمي فارسيريتا كترم بالك
هل لأفعالنا البسيطة قيمة؟
जब बर्फानी तोदे सब पिघल जाएंगे तो बर्फानी रीछों
Welche
का क्या
Art von
मसला
Auswirkungen hat Palmöl?
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to 4600 Kilometers of Sustainability, a podcast where we, Sonja and Misha, bring sustainability information to you in an easily digestible and hopefully entertaining form as we hang out together but 4600 kilometers away from each other.
In Islamabad, it is bright and sunny today, and the temperature is 30 degrees Celsius.
In Tampere, we have 8 degrees Celsius, and it's also nice and sunny.
Today, we are discussing individual deeds and if they matter, how and how much. Of course, we will also talk about what each of us can do to help our beloved planet.
This is our last episode, at least for now. Namely, this concludes the university course that this project is a part of. But Misha and I have liked doing this, so once we are done with our thesis, we might continue somewhere in summer and maybe change the content and the general vibe a little bit.
Yes, indeed. We will see what happens. Now, on to today's topic. If we ask if individual deeds matter, the immediate answer is of course they do. Like if all the people took shorter showers, of course we would save enormous amounts of water. But when you look a little bit closer to the topic, it's a lot more complicated than that.
A great example is that the huge fossil fuel company BP is actually who coined the term carbon footprint and published their carbon footprint calculator in 2004. Yes, the same BP who is responsible for Deepwater Horizon, the oil spill disaster that is considered the largest oil spill in history. And yes, the same BP that is known to run huge greenwashing campaigns with one hand and keeping oil extraction and selling as their main activity with the other.
Now, it is natural to think that it does not matter who's behind the term. After all, isn't it a great measure that everyone uses, even environmental scientists? It is still good to measure your carbon footprint and try to decrease it, right?
And yes, it is a useful measure, and yes, the good guys use it too. And yes, it is good to be aware and try to reduce your carbon footprint. However, it definitely does matter who is behind the term. After all, you have to consider why they came up with it. Isn't it awfully convenient to them that people are focusing on their own consumption and also how others live their lives? And while we are busy putting blame on ordinary people, fossil fuel companies like BP can keep doing what they do and making profits.
And this, if anything, should remind us to look beyond our individual deeds and especially beyond what other people do or do not do. We should really start making some noise towards the companies that are responsible for environmental destruction and the governments that regulate what they can and cannot do, and the governments that give large subsidies to these fossil fuel companies from the money that you and I paid taxes for.
And this brings us to a very important point, that your individual deeds don't just mean what you buy, what you eat, how you travel or commute, etc. It also very much means whether and how you decide to be an active citizen. It means who you vote for, what you post on your social media, if you go to protests, what petitions you sign, and a lot more things.
And what we both have probably noticed is that the impact of your individual deeds and consumption habits extends further than their immediate environmental footprint. And what we both have probably noticed is that the impact of individual deeds and consumption habits extends further than their immediate environmental footprint. Your choices might inspire the people around you to make a change as well. If all of your friends do something, let's say they buy the most of their clothes secondhand, you probably do that too.
Yeah, and maybe more directly in your household. If you start recycling or cook certain type of food, it becomes pretty easy for the rest of the household to pick up your habits. For example, my dietary choices have also impacted what my family members eat as well as what my partner eats. And then there is of course the fact that supply answers to demand. When I was starting to cut out meat from my diet in year 2013, there were no pulled oats and stuff available. It was mostly lentils, beans, falafels, etc. But veganism and vegetarianism have been growing in popularity in Western countries, and now in 2021 There's just so many delicious dishes available, from oat ice cream to very real looking and tasty meat alternatives.
Social influence is also recognized as effective in the United Nations Emissions Gap Report 2020 in terms of, for example, solar panels, sustainable transport choices, and plant-based diet. People follow the others similar to them, so your friends might follow you if you make a change.
And the report also refers to this theory that once a critical mass, meaning a certain proportion of the population, around 10 to 40%, is reached, we get to a tipping point where the practice spreads rapidly and finally becomes the new norm.
But this is all not to say that only how you affect others is important and the direct impacts of your lifestyle are not a big deal. Our individual lifestyle choices are a huge deal. Actually, whether or not individual needs matter shouldn't be a question at all. The thing is, according to United Nations, we are going to have to change how we consume. If we want to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius, it is not about whether what you do matters. It is about doing what we have to do. And the wealthier you are, the more you're probably emitting. And so the more you need to cut your emissions. This is something we actually went through in the climate justice episode already. Some of the important changes are what we eat, how we heat, our homes, and how we move.
And of course, public and private sector have a role in that too. They have to make changes that allow for and promote more sustainable lifestyles. And that is where the active citizenship, like voting and campaigning for policy changes, come in. They refer to some policy examples in the UN Emission Gap Report 2020, so maybe they could help you guys to get a clearer picture of what kind of policy changes we mean. So for example, in Austria, they have replaced the domestic flight between Vienna and Salzburg with train.
And for example, in the Netherlands, there are such policies and city design in places that nearly everyone chooses cycling over other means of transport if possible. Driving a car is made inconvenient and expensive, especially in the city centers, whereas cycling is attractive and convenient. And really, age, income, or gender don't really affect the amount that people cycle, which means it is really accessible and an equal means of transport.
I can tell from experience too that they have really great bike paths and they are everywhere. And so cycling levels are like 10 times higher than in the UK or USA. So not bad, Dutch friends. And Dutch people are really pros at cycling. It is so cool when some 80-year-old people bike past you on the speed of light. And you often see quite creative ways how people can fit all their stuff on their bikes, so that they seem to defy the laws of physics. And I also once saw a guy that was eating noodles with chopsticks while biking. It looked really dangerous.
Please do not try that at home. Anyway, of course, financial policies like solar panel subsidies are also helpful, as well as labeling products so that the consumer instantly knows how sustainable they are. These policies are examples of changes that we as citizens have to demand.
Okay, this has been quite a ride, and we understand that you might be confused now what the role of individual deed is. Did we answer the question? Maybe. So in summary, yes, individual deeds do matter, and we do have to change our lifestyles. However, this should not be the end of the story. We should be active in demanding the change from governments and private businesses so sustainable lifestyles become actually achievable for everyone and so that they become the norm.
So a lot of people asked us what they can do in their daily life to combat climate change. So Sonja, let's now talk about the most effective individual actions that our friends and family can take that can help in making their daily lives and actions more environmentally friendly and sustainable.
That sounds like a good idea. So according to a research paper by Wines and Nicholas, sustainable actions can be classified into 3 categories: high impact, medium impact, and low impact. We'll talk about them one by one. And as requested, we will also give concrete numbers of the amount of annual climate savings in CO2 kilograms equivalent per year. This unit just includes all greenhouse gas emissions to the count and translates how they correspond to a certain amount of CO2 when it comes to global warming.
Let us start with high impact actions. I understand a lot of people like having big families because it means that you're never lonely and have a bigger support system. But unfortunately, at the same time, it is not really great for the planet if everyone starts having a big family. The most high impact action that one can take is having one fewer child. This saves up to 23,700 to 117,700 kg CO2 equivalent reduced per year, depending on if the child is born in a developed or developing country, as well as the lifestyle of the family. This is often taught to us and also mentioned in media, but this is also quite complicated because, on the other hand, climate change is really not a population size problem, but it's about unsustainable lifestyles in the rich countries.
Yes, indeed. This became quite clear in our climate justice episode. So, like, shaming global south with high population growth is really not it. Also, if all the environmentally conscious people stop having kids, then who is teaching their kids to be environmentally conscious? This is actually a great example of how sustainability requires a lot of social consideration as well, and not just numbers. Moving on to the next action, living car-free life. Now, this action saves around 1,000 to 5,300 kilograms of CO2 equivalent reduced per year. You can instead opt to use public transport, bicycles, and walk for commuting to places.
Now I understand that this is not always possible, especially in countries where they do not have proper infrastructure as the developed world for public transport or designated bike lanes. Instead, you can opt for carpooling with the neighbors and colleagues if you want to get to the same location, because then at least the CO2 emissions are halved.
That's true. And in case you still want to use your car, you should try and buy a hybrid car or an efficient car, because then you reduce 1,190 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per year. One of our friends actually asked if they should opt for an electric car or a hybrid car, and which is better choice.
That's a very good question. So it comes down to a few factors: money, the area you live in, and the purpose of using car. So in the case where you have disposable income to buy an electric car and you reside in an area with many charging stations and do not have plans on going for long drives to remote areas, then you should definitely buy an electric car.
But in case where you do have money to buy a car, but live in an area with not too many charging stations and plan on taking long drives or trips to remote areas, then hybrid cars are the best for you. Now that we are already talking about traveling, let's not forget that avoiding one flight, depending on length, can reduce 700 to 2,800 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per year. This is something many people struggle with, as traveling is exciting and people do tend to crave the prospect of exploring new cities and countries. But is it really responsible?
I understand what you mean, and sometimes it's also about the necessity. For example, I came to the Netherlands to study sustainability because this is something that was not being taught back home. So I had to travel by air to go home for holidays. And also, at times, people have to visit their family who live abroad.
Yeah, I agree that family and studies are a little bit of a different story from tourism. However, one can always try to take a more sustainable traveling method if time and location allows. I recommend to check for train alternative. For example, between Amsterdam and London, it is much more fun to go by train, although a little bit more expensive. But it gives the added benefit of excitement. You may or may not feel like you're in the movie Murder on the Orient Express or something. May or may not be based on personal experience.
And if you want to travel for tourism, it is a good idea to first see what your own country has to offer. Like, I personally have been to Switzerland twice for mountain tourism, and yet I've not seen the north of Pakistan. Interestingly, the mountain K2 is located in Pakistan, which is the world's second highest mountain. So I guess it's time that we start promoting local tourism instead of international one, and look at what our own countries have to offer.
Yes, definitely. And if you do have to fly, please consider compensating your emissions. Flying is generally done by wealthy people, and in my opinion, most people who can afford to fly can also afford to compensate for those emissions. One company that you can use is Atmosphere. The fair is spelled as in fair trade. They invest, for example, in renewable energy projects. Compensation is definitely not an alternative for emission reduction, like they also admit at the Atmosphere. But in this case, it is the least we can do. Right, so moving on. We have discussed this in previous episodes too, but eating a plant-based diet is very good for the environment. It can reduce around 300 to 1,600 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per year. So perhaps a start can be to reduce meat consumption, as this reduces 230 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per year. We won't talk about this more now. If you want to know more about the effects of plant-based diet versus animal-based diet, please listen to episode 6.
Right, let's move to moderate and low impact actions now. To start with, please do not buy more than you need. Do not get tempted by promotions and offers at supermarkets. Trust me, you do not need that extra lettuce. It is going to end up molding in your refrigerator. So, yeah, just by reducing your own food waste and by making sure that none of the food you buy gets wasted, you can save around 370 kilograms CO2 equivalent per year.
So yes, guys, please be mindful of what you put in your shopping trolleys and plan your meals ahead so you do not have to end up wasting stuff you did not require to begin with. You should also try to eat local instead of buying food items that have traveled thousands of miles.
However, keep in mind that local food is the most sustainable when it has grown near you. So if the climate allows, do try to grow vegetables at home. As climate in Pakistan is perfect for crops to grow, my family has a kitchen garden at home with tomatoes, different type of herbs, eggplants, bitter gourd, radishes, etc.
And I have just sown my carrots for this year. And anyway, you should also try and work with the seasons and grow seasonal fruits and vegetables naturally instead of artificially in greenhouses, as that can be very energy intensive. It has been found that in terms of production and energy consumption, greenhouse crops are one of the most intensive activities of the agriculture sector. Truth is, if you live in a country where crops grow naturally, then it's better and easier to buy local. But if you live in a colder region, it becomes more complicated.
In those cases, it can be better to ship fruits and vegetables from abroad instead of artificially producing them locally. But saying that, you should still try to limit the consumption of, for example, exotic food from abroad. And in doing so, you will also reduce around 100 to 360 kilograms CO2 equivalent emissions reduced per year. But Sonia, you still have to try Pakistani mangoes, and maybe we can make an exception for once.
Yeah, I think so. Also, we do need our vitamins in the north too. And also notice that, like we said, these are low impact actions. So reducing food waste and eating local has much smaller impact than reducing animal products, even though they get so much attention in media.
Also, guys, please reduce and recycle. The best policy is to buy less because recycling is not always effective. Please replace your plastic bags with canvas bags or cotton bags. But if you're not able to do, then at least try to reuse your plastic bags. The actions of reducing and reusing approximately reduces 5 to 250 kilograms CO2 equivalent emissions per year.
Let's just sum up this episode by mentioning some more of the low impact actions that you can take. We do not have concrete figures for all of them though. You should try to run the dishwasher when it's full because this conserves water. Upgrade light bulbs at home to energy saving ones. This reduces 90 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per year. And finally, you can do laundry in cold water as this reduces 220 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per year.
All right, listeners, so these are some of the individual actions that you can incorporate in your daily life to shift to a more eco-friendly lifestyle. And please do not forget to spread awareness while you're on it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us today. We really appreciate it. We hope you join us next time too. Oh wait, we are still not sure about our future plans.
But we really hope we can continue the series. Thank you so much for sticking around with us until episode 8. I really hope you learned something new while listening to our podcast and are a little bit more aware of environmental issues surrounding us and why climate change is such a huge issue.
Bye, friends.
Bye.